But we need to zoom the lens out, and we need to appreciate that 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4 says, the God of the age confuses the minds of the unbelievers so that they don't meet Christ. We've got a problem with what the God of the age is doing in the culture. Yeah. He's dividing us. He'd like to divide us. Let's not let politics divide us. Let's do the Bible.
Take a look at this map. This is just the past 48 hours, and surely there was more in corners of the country that we haven't yet heard of. In Buffalo, 10 people were killed in what was a horrifying act of domestic terrorism. Then in California, a gunman opened fire during a lunch reception at the Irvine Taiwanese Presbyterian Church in Laguna Woods. One person killed there, 5 others injured. In Houston, Texas, at a regular weekend flea market, 2 people were killed and 3 injured. In Chicago, a 16-year-old was shot dead near one of the city's top tourist attractions. And in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, there were 3 shootings near the area where a huge crowd had gathered to watch the Bucks-Celtics game. The Bucks lost, and the madness broke out. Tonight, we're going to talk about what's ailing our country, a nation under siege from gun violence, whether it's post-COVID anxiety, economic differences, violent video games, broken families, lack of mental health awareness and treatment, or a spiritual void. The one commonality in each of these cases is the fundamental lack of respect for life. And joining us now from Los Angeles is Pastor Marc Little of Concerned Communities for America. Pastor, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's good to be with you, and I'm sorry that it is in response to such a tragedy.
I know. I feel exactly the same way. But that's where we are. That's where we are in this country. The fabric of society decays from many, many threads, and I can't help but think that this spate of shootings that we're seeing in so many different areas, and we see it again and again and again, is part of this massive decay in our society. What can we do? What can we do?
Thank you for the question. It's a two-pronged response. We have 2 things happening in the culture. We have a devaluing of life that we have seen as we have watched genocide in the womb, certainly at least since 1973. And so the culture has devalued life in general. But on top of that, we have forces in our culture and in the United States in particular that have come against so many things that are the bedrock of our nation, the nuclear family and law enforcement. We've seen a defund the police movement, and there is a direct correlation with the surge in crime in places like Portland, Milwaukee, Atlanta, and Philadelphia, and the homicide rates. There's a correlation as we have demeaned our law enforcement officers. And so what we have to do, number one, and I have to say this as a pastor because this is my heart, is we really have to get back to being community. We would know as a community back in the old days if Johnny across the street had a little problem that perhaps we needed to pay attention to as a community. We have a mental health crisis in our nation. That's number one. And number two, we have a problem with demonizing those people, those men and women who have charged and have committed their lives to keeping us safe. We have to put our arms around them. And so all in all, we've got to love one another as we love ourselves. That's the Bible. And then we need to embrace those men and women who have made a life commitment to protect and to serve.
You know, that sounds so wonderful, but at times like this, the cynic in me comes out and I say, you know, what you just said in many respects is easier said than done. You talked about the breakup of the family in some respects, and I want to hone in on that right now for just one example, because there's a trend. I don't think it's in the particular case with this Buffalo shooting, but so many of the young men who perpetrate these kinds of crimes lack an adult role model in their lives, especially a father figure. Do you see that in your work as a pastor?
I do see that, and it's important first for your viewers to understand my perspective. I am a survivor of a violent crime. I was gunned down at USC by an 18-year-old black Crip, a gang member, with a 12-gauge shotgun, And I've been on the end of this terrible, terrible tragedy. And my heart goes out to those in Brooklyn, those mothers, those grandmothers who just went out to shop. It is just an unspeakable offense and crime. And so my heart goes out. In our ministry, there is no doubt that the decay of our culture is directly related to the absence of fathers, not just in the home, but in the community at large. You don't have to be a dad, a biological dad, to be a leader, to be a man, to be a figure to a young man. I often say to people, a young man who is not being admired by an older man is a young man who is hurting. We all have a role to play in our communities. And when we don't step up and we don't lead, we get decay in general, not just what happened in Brooklyn, but young men going into the prison system for petty crimes, young men not going to school, dropping out of high school, a young man becoming fathers too early in their lives, and then perpetuating this cycle. Absentee fatherhood is a major, major crisis in our country.
You know, I was listening to a Jordan Peterson podcast this morning before coming to work, and he makes this point that it doesn't necessarily take a father. It's just one person, one man in a young man's life who somehow intervenes that kid, finds some connection to. It doesn't have to be a father necessarily. And I'm sure you've seen that through your work in the church.
That's right. And to my point, you don't have to be a biological dad to give a young man leadership. What we learn when we see kids growing up, and I have an 8-year-old, and I have to tell you, it is stunning the things that they mimic, from how you brush your teeth to how you put on your shoes. Young men are looking for the right models to emulate. And it's our charge. I think it's a biblical mandate. It's called headship. We have got to model the right path. Jesus is the model for all of us. And as men, as fathers, as husbands, we are charged with headship to show young men and young women what love looks like and how to model it in our homes and in our communities.
Right. You know, one of the things that really irritates me in the immediate aftermath of these shootings is the rush to judgment from political forces to blame some political force in it. If it's the baseball shooter in Washington, D.C. suburbs who shot up Steve Scalise and other people, it's, he was a Bernie bro. Conservatives blaming Bernie Sanders for it. In this particular case, people are blaming, Tucker Carlson for this great realignment that he allegedly espouses. I have my doubts about whether or not he espouses that. But you see this rush to judgment to attach it to some political force. And in fact, in this particular case of the Buffalo shooting, he wrote in his manifesto no references to Fox News whatsoever. He wrote, in fact, that, and I'm quoting here, conservatism is dead, thank God. Not a thing has been conserved other than corporate profits and the ever-increasing wealth of the 1% that exploit people for their own benefit. Doesn't sound like conservatism to me. Any thoughts about that?
He also says that he is an authoritarian leftist. And the idea that Tucker Carlson would promote what they call the replacement theory is actually very much what the left is doing by the invasion at our border. But what we have to do as thinking people is we have to open our eyes and not follow the narrative, because we also witnessed a black man mow down white folks in Waukesha County last year during Christmas. Just yesterday, we saw an Asian man gun down other Asians in a Presbyterian church here in Laguna Woods, California. And we can go on and on. You had the subway shooter in New York. This is not about race, folks. Yes, race plays a part when you have a white man kill all black people. Yes, we see color, obviously. But we need to zoom the lens out, and we need to appreciate that 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4 says, the God of the age confuses the minds of the unbelievers so that they don't meet Christ. We've got a problem with what the God of the age is doing in the culture. Yeah. He's dividing us. He'd like to divide us. Let's not let politics divide us. Let's do the Bible. Right. Let's try to see one another as God's creation.
Another thing that Jordan Peterson has said about this, I remember interviewing him one time after another mass shooting, and he said, people find it very difficult to realize what a dark, dark place you have to be in order to carry out a crime like this. It's a place where very, very few people have been. What is the spiritual component to finding people who are in that dark place and pulling them out of it?
Well, it's twofold. Obviously, family has to pay attention, number one. In our ministry, we do an abortion and miscarriage recovery ministry. And I see men and women who are broken at very deep, deep levels from molestation, from having had abortions, and so forth. People are in a very dark place. And I encourage them. I encourage family members, and I encourage those who might be in that place as we speak. There is help for you. Oftentimes we say that someone would rather go to God with an abortion than to the church with an unplanned pregnancy. And I just need to say that while that might not be your issue, there are people who are available to help you. You don't have to suffer in darkness, even if it's going to your local police department or going to your school counselor. Speak. Tell someone that you're having dark thoughts. Tell someone that you need help. And keep telling someone until someone responds. You're not alone. And there are people who care about you, even if you don't think so.
Pastor Marc Little, you provide us some comfort in a very, very difficult time. Thank you very much. Great to talk to you.
God bless you.